Hey, what's up guys? In this video, we're going to be talking about how you should be building Milio. For starters, this video will be broken down into 3 parts: the runes I run on Milio and the different build paths I take. I'll do my best to include everything, but there's a good chance that some things will be left out. Everything will be timestamped in the description below. If you came from my recent short, you will already know this rune setup, but I'll explain why I run everything that I do here. So to get things started, I still run the standard summon Aery on Milio because I've just found that it works the best on him. It works great with his W, E, and even his R. It applies Aery multiple times through his W, which is pretty good for him. Other than that, everything else here is pretty bad. Arcane Comet is meh, and Phase Rush is meh. So another thing that you'll notice right away is I have Axiom Arcanist swapped out for Mana Flow Band, and the reason behind this is simply because Milio does not lack mana. Where I do feel like he lacks though, however, is his early game team fights, and this is mostly because his ult has a long cooldown early game and even late game comparatively. His ult has an insane 160-second cooldown early game. This is almost 3 minutes. Immediately, what you may notice though is a standard 8 ability haste we also run in this build, and most other builds also include, is that it reduces his cooldown by 12 seconds all the way down to 148. For those of you that might not know about this relatively new rune, I'll put it on the screen now. But basically what this rune does for us is it increases our heal from our ult and reduces the ult cooldown on takedowns. And why is this significant for Milio? Like I said earlier, his ult is on such a long cooldown early that after using it and getting a takedown or two, you already shaved off 10 to 20 seconds off of it. The healing on the rune is important as well, but not nearly as important as the CDR. Moving on to the next rune is a standard Transcendence. There isn't really much that needs to be said about this rune other than the fact that it's a staple rune for enchanters. On levels 5 and 8, it gives you a small boost of 5 ability haste, and later on in the game at level 11, you unlock the ability to reduce your remaining cooldowns by 20% on champion takedowns. What this basically means is that if your W has 10 seconds left before the next cast and you manage to finally kill someone in the fight, that the cooldown will be reduced to 8 seconds immediately. In this rune slot, I used to run Celerity since it pairs well with his movement speed, but I have found that Transcendence is honestly just too strong not to take. And finally, on the sorcery tree is the choice between Scorch, Wire Walking, and Gathering Storm. I'm just gonna be completely honest with this one. Scorch is kinda useless on Milio. The reason being that Scorch only applies off Milio's Q. That's literally it. It would be so much better if it worked with his passive, but unfortunately it doesn't work like that. It is nice, however, for early game trades, but in most matchups, especially into engage, you want to save your Q for that engage. Moving on to Water Walking, I personally use this a lot when there were 2 sets of grubs. I would use the Water Walking to get a head start up the top of the map and make myself a bit stronger in the river. However, I found that the most consistent room for Milio scaling is just Gathering Storm. AP might not seem that valuable on Enchanter, but his Q, E, and R, and even his passive have quite a high AP scaling ratios. His Q being the most notable at 120%. This rune helps Milio scale into the late game and gives him that extra bit of healing and shielding. Scorch is a viable option though if you tend to be trading a lot in lane. Next, for the second tree, I like to go Domination. The 2 main reasons being that movement speed and vision are so insanely important in this game, and this tree helps with both of them. Most people tend to go with the standard Resolve tree second, of Bone Plating and Revitalize, and even though Bone Plating may help you in the early game against engage, honestly it's not that great into the late game. Revitalize is nice as well, but honestly I don't really see it doing much in my past games. At most, the rune does like around extra 700 healing and shielding in a standard 30-minute game. So instead of those 2 runes, I like to run another one of the fairly new runes, Grisly Mementos. The reason for this being is that it simply reduces your trinket cooldown. Once again, for those of you who may not know about this new rune, Grisly Mementos gains 6 trinket haste for each takedown you get. This can stack up to 18 times, allowing you to get a total of 108 trinket haste. If you couldn't tell already, this rune is honestly quite busted. I'm honestly not sure the exact values of how much time it actually saves you between each sweeper cooldown, but if you guys are interested in that and some numbers on these other runes, please let me know in the comments below. And lastly on the domination tree is Relentless Hunter. As I said before, movement speed is just so insanely powerful in League of Legends, and especially on supports. Being able to get that early game roam on the enemy mid or top before the enemy support does puts you at such an advantage. It also allows for you to go for plays you might not have otherwise been able to go for. This rune gives you 8 movement speed out of combat, up to 5 stacks for each takedown, stacking up to a total of 40 movement speed out of combat. I think this rune just kind of speaks for itself with giving you such insane movement speed. For reference, that is almost twice as much movement speed as basic boots and only 5 less movement speed than standard lucidity boots. Not to mention, if you use your E on yourself out of combat to get around the map faster, that is an additional 12% to 20% movement speed. This rune is honestly just so insanely strong in general, and I wish I could build it on most champions. And last but not least are the 3 basic runes. I honestly think that there is only one real setup you should be running for these, and it's the ones on screen now. The ability haste is honestly just too strong not to take. Like we explained earlier, even just this one rune alone removes a whole 12 seconds off our early game ult and 7% CDR on all of our other abilities as well. As for the next rune, I used to go the 2% movement speed, but I found that I don't really need it with all the other movement speed increases I get. Also, not to mention the new feats of strength if you manage to get them in your game. And finally, onto the bottom row. I think that a lot of people are baited by this last choice and just go with what is suggested to them by Riot. But I see so many people going the 10 to 180 health over the flat 65 health. I don't really understand how people are baited by this, but in almost every scenario ever, the flat 65 health is just better. Compare the damage of a late game champion to an early game one. Take Caitlyn for instance. Her auto attacks with only Doran's Blade does 77 damage level 1 to a target with 0 armor. With level 6 and just BF Sword, she is already doing 137 damage per auto. At level 18 with full build, she's going to be doing 889 damage per auto. Basically, to sum it up, the 10 to 180 health falls off hard into the late game, even though it's advertised as a scaling rune. And while I might add this rune isn't useless, it's just not good on Milio. It's quite good for champions like Braum who have a lot of scaling with HP. We just want that early game survivability on our squishy Milio. Moving on to the different build paths I'd take, I'll throw up a few builds on screen that you can pretty much run any game. For the 2 builds, one is good for a team with a lot of auto attackers and the other is great for a team with not many. So instead of explaining every single different build you can go on Milio, I'll just explain what items have good synergy with him and what items you should be building. When it comes to the choice of the support item, you really only should be going Dreammaker. All the other support items are fairly useless on him. I see some people going Celestial Opposition, but it's honestly just really not that great on Milio and ranged champions in general. Dreammaker buffs your team's damage and reduces the incoming damage. It also works great with Knight's Vow. Moving on to boots, a lot of people have a misconception that you should only be building CDR boots on Milio or enchanters in general, but I just don't think that's true. In games with a lot of slows or where I want a lot of mobility, I always tend to go Swifties because they're just great for those reasons. In a game against a lot of AD assassins or just a lot of AD damage in general, I tend to go plated steel caps just to give myself that extra survivability. Also in a game like that, I would usually go Knight's Vow. In games against a lot of crowd control where I'm just dying to crowd control or I could survive if I could move, then I tend to go Merc Treads. Basically, to sum it up, don't limit yourself to only buying CDR boots. I would say almost every pair of boots is useful and viable in Milio. Not to mention there's been a ton of nerfs on CDR boots over the past few years. One thing to keep in mind as well is that since you're such a squishy target, you're going to be sought out in team fights, so having extra survivability is never bad. The more they use on you, the less they use on your teammates. When it comes to what items you should be building on Milio, there are 3 top items that have great synergy with them: Echoes of Helia, Ardent Censer, and Moonstone. To start things off with Echoes of Helia and why it's so great on Milio is its passive pairs perfectly with Milio's W. Every time you auto attack a champion, you build a stack of Echoes of Helia. That stack can heal your teammates and damage the enemies. These stacks only apply when you do healing or shielding, and since Milio's W is a constant tick of healing, it constantly applies. has. So basically what you want to do in team fights with him is use your W on your teammates and constantly auto attack the enemies. This is why Echoes of Helia is great into extended team fights and enemy tanks / bruisers, because you can just constantly attack them and heal your teammates while dealing damage to the enemies. No other champion has this great of synergy with this item. Here's a short clip from my stream showing why I rushed Echoes of Helia first. It is OP, but some games like the fights are just way too short to build it. That's why sometimes I like to rush Ardent first, because like the fights are just so short. But this game, dude, they have a Galio, they have a Tarek, they have a Garen, we have a fucking Xin Zhao, we have a Lucian who isn't really gonna shred through these guys right away. So it's like, it's a really great Echoes game first, to be honest. Moving on to Ardent Sensor, I'm going to use another clip from my stream because I feel like I just explained it so well there. Also, that's another thing that like I never see people building is Ardent. Ardent is so insanely strong in on Milio in so many different ways. The biggest being that like he just applies it so well. Like he is a Ardent machine. You can have constant uptime of Ardent because his W lasts forever. His E has multiple charges. His R applies it, and even his Q applies it. You're just constantly applying Ardent, first of all, and second of all, if you have Echoes of Helia, each time you auto attack with that Ardent, you're constantly healing. So you're doing extra damage, giving your team extra attack speed for structures, importantly, and objectives, importantly. Like, team fights is important, but team fights aren't necessarily what absolutely wins the game. What absolutely wins the game is taking those turrets and objectives. And finally, moving on to Moonstone. Moonstone isn't great by itself, but it works well with the two other items we just listed. It works great with Echoes of Helia because it works with Echoes of Helia's passive and increases the healing from that. It also works well with Ardent Sensor because it allows us to apply Ardent to more teammates on our team. The healing and shielding on Moonstone honestly isn't that great, so it's not really a viable option to rush. If you're going for a max shield Milio with items such as Dawncore, Moonstone is a great choice as well. I tend to go Moonstone if I have a lot of frontliners or if the fights are very extended. So instead of doing a voiceover for every single item, I'm just going to show the items that I use for about 3 seconds each. If you'd like, you could pause the video or read about why I build each one. And to wrap things up for items, I always go Watchful Wardstone into Vigilant Wardstone. As I said earlier in the video, Vision is just so insanely strong, and having those extra control wards to control areas is so insanely important in the late game. And last, to wrap up the video, is Milio's skill path. To keep things short and simple, there's only one correct skill order: E max, W max, Q max, and obviously R in between those. For the first two abilities to level up, I almost always start E, but on rare occasions, like against Nautilus, I sometimes start Q. And thanks so much guys for sticking through to the end of the video. Any and all feedback is greatly appreciated, and thanks once again for watching. Have a good one.